The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
After Jesus had been born at Bethlehem in Judea, during the reign of King Herod, some wise men came to Jerusalem from the east. "Where is the infant King of the Jews?" they asked. "We saw his star as it rose, and have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was perturbed, and so was the whole of Jerusalem. He called together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, and inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. "At Bethlehem in Judea," they told him, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, you are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you will come a leader who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod summoned the wise men to see him privately. He asked them the exact date on which the star had appeared, and sent them on to Bethlehem. "Go and find out all about the child," he said, "and when you have found him, let me know, so that I too may go and do him homage." Having listened to what the king had to say, they set out. And there in front of them was the star they had seen rising. It went forward and halted over the place where the child was. The sight of the star filled them with delight, and going into the house they saw the child with his mother Mary, and falling to their knees they did him homage. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. But they were warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, and returned to their own country by a different way. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
As I mentioned at the beginning of Mass, the Feast of the Epiphany comes from the Greek word epiphania, which means a manifestation. So now, God He's kept His promise and brought the Messiah forth for His people, His chosen people, whom He had prepared for hundreds of years to receive Him. But now, contrary to the popular expectation, the Messiah is not just for the Jewish people, the Israelites, but indeed for the whole world. And so the recognition of this divine sonship of the child Jesus by these three wise men is in fact a recognition of the future, or an indication of the future recognition of Christ as the divine Son of God by all the world, all the Gentile world. In other words, Jesus came to save everyone, because everyone had need of salvation. Everyone was in need of forgiveness of sins, and not just the Israelites or the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But notice how God does this. He does this. They were of royal background, and they were also educated men, and they were astronomers. Here it's important to make a little distinction between astronomy and astrology. Astronomy is the systematic study of the heavens. There's different sizes of stars, big and small, close and far away. There are different planets. There are different solar systems around, millions of solar systems in the galaxy. Well, the study of this is, in fact, astronomy. Astrology, on the other hand, looks at certain constellations, formations of stars, and tries to see a hidden meaning into the future by these things, by studying these things. And, if you look at any of the astrology reports in the daily newspaper or whatever, it's so far-fetched, hit and miss, There's no way of knowing the future. because the future is known only by God. But why does the church condemn astrology, whereas anyone interested in astronomy is perfectly welcome to study it? Because astrology wants to put faith and trust in the creature, the creation, whereas in fact the faith and trust should be in the Creator, whom the creation reveals. There's a well-known theologian, in fact my favourite, Hans Urs von Balthasar. He wrote 7 volumes on beauty and how beauty leads us to God. Well, in volume 1 he writes, the totality of creation as a whole, of the universe as a whole, is a monstrance of God's real presence. Hear that again. The entirety of the universe, the created universe as a whole, is a monstrance of God's real presence. Just as when we have the monstrance on the altar during exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, we come consciously to adore Jesus Christ, who is in that host. That host is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, born for us at Bethlehem. But there's also another monstrance that reveals God to us, and that is the created world. The majesty, the beauty, the explosiveness, the energy, the power, the brilliance of all of the universe. All of this reveals something to us about God. And those who get caught up in astrology want to stop at the creation instead of going beyond it to the real revealer of mysteries and saying, I trust in you. I want to abandon my life in you and in your love through faith, and I want you to guide me. So those who get caught up in astrology are in fact ones who don't want to trust in God. And there are a lot of believers, by the way, who get caught up in astrology, or have been from time to time. Perhaps some of us here have been caught up in it. And that's the error with astrology. We need to put our trust, our faith in God. Back to astronomy then. Astronomy, as part of God's creation, or studying God's creation, was the vehicle that God used to lead these men to the light of faith. So there were 2 things going on. They understood the heavens better than most people of the time, but also they were open to receiving an interior light that enabled them to recognize in this special star the one who was behind it. That jump is necessarily a jump of faith. If we don't have faith, then we will look at the created world and say, wow, this is majestic, it's amazing, it's awesome. And it'd be crazy to think all of this has in fact come about just by accident. There have been untold scientists who previously considered themselves to be either atheist or agnostic. By the way, many people who say they are atheists are actually not atheists. They're actually agnostic. Because atheist means I believe for certain there is no God. In other words, I have evidence to point out that there is no God. That is a big joke of the century. On the other hand, there's lots of evidence to suggest there is a God. But agnosticism, just from the Greek words, agonoeo, so without knowledge, to not know, is somebody who finds it difficult to believe in God. That, there are lots of people like that. But when we look at the created world, we see lots of evidence that points to a superior intelligence. How many biologists studying microbiology and the intricacies, for example, of the human hand, or of a heart, or of the brain, and to think, wow, all this is supposed to come about by accident? Big joke. Those who are studying science and the subatomic particles, and to think the order, the way the electrons spin around the nucleus, the way the couples of the electrons move around together, and the different layers called orbitals around the atoms, the way chemistry moves together with precision, mind-blowing. In fact, the discoverer of the periodic table of the elements, Dmitri Mendeleev, I think it was Russian, and at least sounds Russian. Well, anyway, at the time when he developed the periodic table of the elements, hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, and so forth, all these things were, in fact, not all the elements were yet discovered. And it was revealed to him in a dream. We've been hearing a lot about dreams lately in the scriptures. St. Joseph, the wise men today, you know what? He knew enough to know that there were elements that would exist that yet were not existed, had not been founded at that time or discovered. And he left gaps for them as he wrote out the periodic table, as it was revealed to him in a dream. And later on, years later, they were discovered and fit into exactly the same place. All this dramatic order of the universe is all a manifestation of God's glory. Now, the wise men, God uses their own particular specialty, were able to recognize in this star there's something amazing. Notice how nobody else seems to have noticed the star. They get to Jerusalem. Oh, yeah, actually, we did notice it was a peculiar thing, And if the star was seen or recognizable by everybody, then they should have recognized it too. But there's no other evidence in the ancient world that anybody else noticed this star. So what it says to us is that it was something given specially to them. And to them, through the light of faith, they came to recognize that the creator of the star is in fact pointing to his own Son. So they make this great big journey. Now, they get to Jerusalem and they start asking where he's supposed to be born. I don't know what it tells you, but what it tells me is that perhaps at this time the star was no longer visible to them. But there's also something theological going on. That the land of Israel is the land of the people expecting the Messiah. True or false? True. Therefore, there is already faith in the land of Israel. True or false? How did they come to this faith? Because of divine revelation. Through Moses and the covenant. And so now, the natural revelation, you might say, of the star was no longer visible to them. And they asked from the people, the land of Israel, who had received the revelation, where is he supposed to be born? O King of the Jews, we saw his stars. Oh, but we haven't seen any stars. And then they go to their source of divine revelation, which is not natural, but divine, and the scriptures. And then they quote to him from the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least of the leaders of Judah. So then, what happens is for the wise men, the natural revelation through creation and nature, coupled with the inspiration now from the scriptures, serve to bring them together to Bethlehem. In Bethlehem now, we find that things changed a little bit. So this was not immediately after Jesus was born, even though in the Christmas season everything seems to be compressed together. What do we see? The sight of the star filled them with delight. The Greek word says, with exceeding joy. Oh, wow, there you are. We'd lost you for a time. Now we see you again. And the star moves and rests. Then, going into the house, they saw the child with his mother. Going into the house, where was Jesus born? In a stable, not a house. So by this stage already St. Joseph had found some alternative accommodation for the Holy Family. And he knew that probably too tired and it's not healthy and safe to be making a long journey while in this precarious state. So the wise men are led to the house where St. Joseph was no doubt renting at that time. Even the three gifts that are given to them, or that they bring rather, are inspired by faith. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Each of them reveals something about the nature of Jesus. Gold reveals, what do you think about Jesus? Does it reveal his Godhead? What does it reveal about Jesus? Kings, exactly. They wear crowns, crowns of gold. So kings and gold go together. So the gold reveals his kingship, which is a feast we celebrate in a special way in the Feast of Christ the King at the end of the liturgical year. But the kingship, of course, this is the kingship that Herod is threatened by and later on wants to kill him. That's the undercurrent of this story today. So the gold reveals the kingship of Jesus. The frankincense is the Godhead, right? The divinity. In the ancient world, frankincense was used to worship God. Zechariah was burning incense in the sanctuary when the archangel Gabriel appeared to him. Incense was also used for a whole lot of other things, right? In the Middle Ages and in early Roman times when a noble was going into a smelly part of the city, they would have somebody burning incense in front of them so they would smell something nice instead of the putrid smell of whatever is the area that they were visiting. But there were other uses, but the use here is intended as worshipping the divine. And myrrh, what's the myrrh signify about Jesus? Death, the burial, exactly. So it's a spice which the Jewish people used to anoint the body after death and prepare it. So they were inspired, these three wise men. Did they realize fully what was going on? Probably not. But they were inspired by faith to recognize this is the Son of God here. And they bring these gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to help the Holy Family. No doubt the gold would have helped them when they had to flee to Egypt to escape Herod. And they would have paid their way for however long they were there through the gold that they, in fact, had come to them. What does it tell us, though, about ourselves? God still manifests himself to us. Perhaps astronomy is not our specialty, but we all have an appreciation of his creation. And if we are open to seeing his beauty in creation, we will also hear him speaking to us. Coupled by the faith that we already have received through our baptism, which is nourished by the sacred scripture and by the sacred tradition of the church, those two work together. And through this, we come to see that God, in fact, is very near to us. That we don't know God simply in some distant form, but God is with us in a daily way, and he's there in the rhythms of whatever unfolds for us in the day. And so let's pray on this feast of the Epiphany, just as the three wise men were able to recognize Christ through the star, their own natural knowledge of their culture and science at the time, that we too may have that outward-looking nature that recognizes God in what is happening around us and about us, always through the light of faith, but to know that God is trying to speak to us a word through his creation. What that word is saying, we have to come to terms with and understand, but he's definitely saying something to us.